Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 10.2b. I've entitled this video, Independence and Modern Era of the Andes and Mid-Latitude Countries. This video is going to cover pages 309 to 311. Independent countries. By the early 1800s, most of South America had been under Spanish control for nearly 300 years. History was about to change once again. The reasons for this shift were local as well as international. Overthrow of Spanish rule. In the early 1800s, revolution and liberation movements were occurring around the world. The United States threw off British rule, and the French replaced the monarchy with a republic. Struggles for independence also occurred in Mexico and the Caribbean. People in South America were encouraged by these events. It was exactly the right time for two South American revolutionary leaders to lead the fight against Spanish rule. These two leaders were, pictured on the right here, Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín. Question number 1. By the early 1800s, most of South America had been under Spanish control for how long? For nearly 300 years. Question 2. What encouraged the people in South America to fight for their independence in the early 1800s? Well, independent fights were happening all over the world. America threw off British rule, the French replaced their king with a republic, and struggles for independence were happening in the Caribbean and Mexico. So, hey, if they can do it, why can't we? Sort of became their thought process. Question 3. Which two South American revolutionary leaders led the fight for independence against Spain? Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín. The two leaders were able to rally support for independence. San Martín pioneered many elements of guerrilla warfare, the use of troops who know the local landscape so well that they are difficult for traditional armies to find. By the mid-1800s, many South American countries had gained independence. Question number 4. San Martín used guerrilla warfare tactics. What is guerrilla warfare? That is when a side uses troops and they know the landscape so well that they're able to, it's hard to catch them. So they may be smaller in size than the larger armies, but they can do hit and run tactics. They can hit you and then flee back into the countryside. And because they know the land so well, it's hard to find them. That's called guerrilla warfare. Power and governance. After the Spanish left South America, several different countries formed. Their borders mostly followed the divisions set in place by the Spanish colonizers. But, despite gaining independence, political and economic hardships continued on the continent. In contrast to the United States, there was no strong momentum for unity in South America. In fact, the rulers of many of the newly independent countries were wealthy aristocrats, powerful landowners, or military dictators. Their mindset was more European than South American. In addition, communication between countries was difficult because of the mountainous terrain. The new countries lacked a tradition of self-government. The British colonies in North America had elected representatives in their colonial legislatures. The new countries of South America, however, did not have a structure in place for a government to function. The newly independent countries drafted constitutions. The enormously uneven distribution of wealth between rich and poor, however, resulted in social and economic instability. Several countries engaged in bloody conflicts over boundary disputes and mineral rights. These conflicts led to much loss of life and weakened economies. And now we can answer question 5. What were some major factors that caused South America to struggle to gain political and economic success after they achieved their independence from Spain? Well, there are a couple of factors here. Number 1, there really wasn't a push for unity in South America because many of the rulers saw South America more like Europe than they did how we did in the United States. Secondly, communication was very difficult because of the Andes Mountains, because of the terrain. It was hard to have strong communication between the countries or among the countries. And 3, they just lacked the same type of tradition of self-government that we had here in the United States because the British had let us have representative colonial legislatures. So we had some things to follow. We had some examples. We had lived that before. South America didn't have that, and so they really didn't have that kind of structure to look at. Question number 6. What was a huge factor that led to social and economic instability in the South American countries? The big-time, uneven distribution of wealth between rich and poor. Here we see that, the big gap between those of the have-nots and those of the haves. Question number 7. What two negative impacts came from the bloody conflicts in South America? Well, it led to much loss of life, and their economies were weakened. They weren't as strong. History of the region in the modern era. The Andean and mid-latitude countries continued to face challenges during the late 1800s and 1900s. With military backing, dictators seized power, and they ignored democratic constitutions. Economies were still dependent on outside powers. Economic challenges. The countries of the region faced economic challenges. Among the challenges were developing and controlling resources, building roads and railroads, and establishing trade links. Before independence, the countries of the region depended economically on Spain and Brazil. After independence, the economies of the region remained tied to countries outside South America. Rapidly industrializing countries in Europe exploited the region for its raw materials. Wealthy landowners, cattle grazers, and mining operators refused to surrender their ties to European investors. Beginning in the early 1900s, large United States and European multinational firms, these are companies that do business in several countries, started mining and smelting operations in the region. As the economies expanded, profits grew for wealthy landowners and multinational companies, but many workers and farmers and their families remained mired in poverty. Question number 8. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, what were dictators doing in some of the South American countries? They were ignoring democratic constitutions. Question number 9. What were 3 major economic challenges facing the Andean and mid-latitude countries after they won independence? Well, the 3 challenges they were facing was, number 1, developing and controlling resources, 2, building roads and railroads, and 3, establishing trade links. Question number 10. Before their independence, what 2 countries did the region depend upon economically? Spain and Brazil. Question 11. What did rapidly industrializing countries in Europe do to the region after they gained their independence? Well, these companies, these rapidly industrializing countries in Europe, what they did was they went down to South America and they said, ooh, we see resources we want. And so they exploited the region and they said, we want what you have. So they went down there and they took those raw materials and they used it to make themselves more profit. Question 12. What does the word multinational mean? Multinational means companies that do business in several countries. That's what multinational firms are. Companies that do business in several countries. Multi meaning many, national, nations. Question 13. How did the multinational companies create more income inequality in South America? Well, as they were exploiting these raw materials, the rich got richer. So the wealthy landowners, the multinational companies, they got huge amounts of profit. Unfortunately, for the workers and farmers that were actually doing the hard labor, they didn't see a lot of that success. And so you saw this huge gap between the haves down here and the have-nots up there. Political instability. Economic woes led to calls for reform. Political leaders promised changes for the better. In 1946, Argentinians elected General Juan Perón as the nation's president. Perón and his wife Eva were popular with the people, and you can see them pictured on the right. The new government enacted economic reforms to benefit the working people. However, the Perón government limited free speech, censored the press, and added to the country's debt. After Perón was overthrown in 1955, shown here, the military government ruled Argentina. Question number 14. What were the good things and the bad things that came from the rule of General Juan Perón's rule in Argentina? Well, the good things were that his government put in some reforms, some changes to benefit the working people. Those were the good things. But there were bad things. Number 1, he limited free speech. Number 2, he censored the press. And 3, he added to the country's debt. The new government moved to put an end to unrest. The rulers imprisoned thousands of people without trial. Some were tortured or killed. Others simply, quote, disappeared. Argentina was also troubled by conflict over the Falkland Islands, and you can see that pictured where the Falkland Islands are located on this map right here. Argentina and Great Britain both claimed the Falklands. After a brief war in 1982, Argentina was defeated, and the Falkland Islands remained a British territory. Question number 15. When the Argentinian military overthrew Perón, what troubling things happened in Argentina? Well, thousands were put in prison without a trial. Number 2, some were tortured. 3, some were killed, and others, number 4, simply disappeared, which is just a nice textbook way of saying they were probably killed and never found again. Question number 16. Which country did Argentina fight over the Falkland Islands in 1982? That was Great Britain. They fought right down there. Significant changes were also taking place in the country of Chile. In the presidential election of 1970, Chileans elected a socialist candidate named Salvador Allende, and he is pictured right here. Allende took action to redistribute wealth and land. The government took over Chile's copper industry and banking system. Allende's economic reforms were popular with workers, but angered the upper classes. In 1973, Chilean military officers staged a coup, an illegal seizure of power, and killed Allende. And here we see that coup happening right here. A military dictatorship headed by General Augusto Pinochet ruled Chile for the next 16 years. Question number 17. How did Salvador Allende try to change things in Chile when he was elected in 1970? Well, he tried to move it to a socialist government, and that is a government where wealth and land is redistributed to try to make no wealth, no poor, to try to make everybody have sort of the same. It tries to eliminate poverty, which also eliminates wealth, and it tries to redistribute that to everybody. If you think about it, it's basically stealing from the rich to give to the poor. That's kind of what he was trying to do with that program, which of course was very popular with the workers, but of course angered the people that he was taking the money from. Question number 18. What is a coup? That is an illegal seizure of power, usually done by a military, and it's usually violent. Question number 19. How was Chile ruled from 1973 to 1990? With a military dictatorship. Movements for change. In recent years, democracies have replaced dictatorships. Yet, the countries in the region are still struggling to end corruption in government, shrink the gap between rich and poor, provide jobs, and protect human rights. Voters also have elected new leaders. In 2005, Bolivians elected Evo Morales, the country's first indigenous president. Morales introduced a new constitution and land reforms, brought industries under government ownership, and moved to limit U.S. corporate involvement in the country's politics. In 2006, Chileans elected the country's first female president, Michelle Bachelet. A year later, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner became Argentina's first elected female president. Both female leaders started efforts to improve human rights and equal opportunity. Question number 20. More recently, what trend in politics has been happening in South America? They have been replacing dictatorships with democracies, so that's a good thing. We like that here in the United States. Thumbs up. Question 21. What are 4 major challenges facing the governments in the region? Well, number 1, they're trying to end corruption in government, and that's very tricky when money's involved. Number 2, they're trying to shrink that gap between the haves and the have-nots, between the rich and the poor. Number 3, they're trying to obviously create jobs for their people. And number 4, they're trying to protect the human rights of the people that they are ruling. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Before we go, guerrilla warfare is a surprise war tactic, not a war full of guerrillas. But that's none of my business. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.